Welcome to Beard's Auto Shop and Lawnmower Service. What I'm going to show you today is I'm going to have a little demonstration here of camshaft speed as to what it would actually look like inside of your engine. Now I know a lot of mechanics and a lot of students going through a training program, they've seen these animated displays of what an engine looks like as it's moving internally. And they'd show the crankshaft going around and the pistons and connecting rods going up and down and so forth. But those animated displays tend to run at only like 10 to 20 RPM. And they don't give you a realistic look at the speed as to what some of this stuff actually operates at. So what I'm going to do here is I took a camshaft out of a V6 engine and put it in my lathe here, and what I'm going to do is operate it at different speeds so you can kind of get some idea as to what it actually looks like, as if you could cut the engine apart and see what's actually happening. Okay, now you got to remember, in a 4-cycle engine, that the camshaft is going to run at half of the speed of the crankshaft. Okay, so this first instance here, what we're going to do is I'm going to run the camshaft at about 130 RPM, which crankshaft speed would be about 260. Now 260 RPM doesn't really sound like a whole lot, but that's roughly the RPM that the starter motor turns the engine over as you're cranking it, trying to get the engine to start. Okay, so here's what this camshaft is going to look like at 260 RPM at the crank, which would be 130 RPM at the camshaft. Now you can see here you've got the main journals of the cam, and then here's your lobes of the cam. You've got your intake and exhaust lobes for each of the cylinders, and you can see them easily as they're going around, and you can see the typical egg shape of the cam lobe itself. Now you have to remember what's happening here inside this engine is you have a lifter that's riding on this lobe, and it's trying to accurately follow this lobe the entire time. So it has to stay tight against that lobe in order for the engine to even operate properly. Now, what helps to keep that lifter down against that lobe? Well, that's what your valve spring does. Now, most people realize that that valve spring closes the valve. Your camshaft will open the valve, and then as the cam comes around, the valve spring actually keeps pressure against the valve to help close the valve. But it also keeps pressure in the valve train against that lifter so it can accurately stay up against that lobe and follow it properly. Okay? So now remember, that's a good look at what that camshaft looks like at 260 crank RPM, which is 130 camshaft RPM. Let me take and change the speed on my lathe here a little bit. I'm going to up it just a little bit here. Now this next instance is once you get the engine started and it's running, well, now that engine's going to be sitting there at an idle speed. It's going to be idling at approximately, say, 800 RPM. Now 800 RPM is how many RPM at the crank? About 400, right? Okay, so that's what I have the cam set for here, is 400 RPM. Now you notice the camshaft is definitely going faster, and if you look close at the lobes of the cam, you can still somewhat see them moving, but they're starting to get to be somewhat of a blur to where they're a lot faster. Now you got to remember, this is the engine as it sits there and idles. You don't even have your foot on the accelerator, you've started it, it's just sitting there idling. So stop and think, even at idle, how difficult it would be for this lifter to be able to follow that cam lobe accurately. Okay? So I'm going to do one more change here. Now, let's just say, for example, you're out there on the road and it's a nice long straightaway, no traffic coming, and you happen to get behind an individual that's going a little bit slower than you want him to go. Well, you decide, hey, I'm going to get out and pass this guy. So you got a nice clear shot, you look down the highway, you pull over into the other lane, and boom, you nail that accelerator to the floor, and for a split second it'll easily go up to 4,000 RPM. Well, here again, 4,000 RPM at the crankshaft equals 2,000 RPM at the camshaft. That's what we're going to see here as soon as I turn this on. It's going to get a little bit louder, but you're going to see what 2,000 RPM looks like. Now you can see at this point the lobes of the cam, they almost look round again because they're going so fast, they're such a blur that they don't even look egg-shaped any longer. So stop and think of how difficult it is for this lifter to be able to follow the profile of that cam lobe. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing at that speed that all of these valve train components can actually still work together and not want to come apart. Okay, so I just thought that'd be something a little bit interesting. It's something you normally don't see, so that puts it in a little bit more perspective there as to what the camshaft actually looks like inside a running engine. So for what it was worth, thanks for stopping by. Beard's Auto Shop Lawnmower Service. Have a good one.